Well, cooperation between China and the United States is crucial if there's to be progress at the climate change conference. They are the world's largest economies, and they are also the two largest carbon emitters. And each has a different influence on nations around the world trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and trying to reach the ambitious targets Paris is setting. CCTV's Jessica Stone is following the story from the newsroom. Jessica.
Susan, Beijing and Washington first proved to the world the power of their partnership when they announced a set of historic emissions reduction commitments back in November of last year. And they were essentially, at the time, announcing their nationally determined contributions a year ahead of these Paris talks. For Beijing, it was a commitment to reach peak emissions by 2030 and increase its renewable energy production. For China, it has since committed to a nationwide carbon trading scheme by 2017. For Washington, it was as high as 28% cuts to its carbon emissions from 2005 levels by 2025. And these announcements really set an example for the rest of the world to make ambitious pledges of their own to reduce emissions and increase pollution offsets. And in recent months, we've seen other major economies like Mexico, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa. They've come forward with targets as well.
Unless both the U.S. and China are really committed to this, it's very hard to get other countries to come along. So I think the U.S. administration certainly recognized that and has worked really hard to reach out to China.
China, India, South Africa, Korea, Brazil, these countries. So I think China did set an example for these other emerging economies, particularly for India.
Wang points out as well that China and the U.S. were at odds during the Copenhagen climate talks, and there was no agreement. Now, 7 years later, they seem to be closer to the same page and even coordinating billions of dollars in financial aid to poorer nations who need help mitigating the impact of climate change. Of course, remember that announcement in September that both of them are committing $3 billion to that effort. Now, while China and the U.S. have a lot in common on climate, they also differ, though, over the level of transparency and emissions that nations should prove. And they also don't agree on whether nations should revisit their reductions targets every 5 years. Those issues and more will have to be ironed out when those more than 150 nations get to the negotiating table at Paris. Susan.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has said the current pledges do not achieve the goal of holding the increase in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius. Where does that leave the focus of the talks, Jessica?
Well, I think it makes it even more important that these two countries work together. It also means they'll go down to the wire, these talks. The roles of China and the U.S. will be important. China has a lot of influence, as Kate mentioned, over developing economies who have an opportunity to really move sooner to non-polluting sources of power production, while the U.S. has a lot of influence on more developed economies who have historically polluted for a long time, and they are also transitioning away from fossil fuels. In fact, the U.S. example is really, you can do it, and you can do it without sacrificing the economy.
Jessica Stone in the newsroom, thank you.